Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to get into the Crown Chakra. This is the 7th chakra, and it actually is located a few inches above your head. So even though it very much governs the remainder of the chakra system, it's not really physically attached to the body. It's more like this little chakra that follows the pillar of light that you are, and it sort of hovers like the idea of a little crown halo kind of floating above your head. Now that's a really interesting visual to think about, thinking like almost like a miniature hula hoop kind of hovering here, because oftentimes when I'm doing healing work on people, one of the first things I'll look for is the crown able to really receive this divine wisdom, this sense of connection to source, connection to your higher self. And what can happen is, after a series of traumas or different types of fragmentation that can happen even on a subconscious level, it can start to really disconnect the crown chakra location. And what'll happen is it almost feels like it's rotated on a different axis. So it'll be like to the side, or it'll be to really forward, or maybe it's sort of like way out here. And so I always look for, where is this sort of chakra ring, hula hoop thing really located? And the moment you kind of postulate that you're bringing it perfectly over this person or yourself, you'll notice that there's sort of this like alignment that kind of kicks in. And it's really funny to do on somebody who's sort of unsuspecting or doesn't really know what you're doing, because you'll get this very visceral, kind of response from them more often than not. And even in your own healing, you'll sort of sense the attachment to the higher self suddenly by just having this kind of adjustment. And so if we don't create that adjustment, what can happen is you can be showering yourself with all this divine, calling in source energy and calling in your guides and asking for clarity, and it's trying to reach you. But if the axis is tilted, it's sort of not coming down the channel the way it was designed to. It's sort of funneling out here, and it's a bit distorted and chaotic. So it's really, really, really important to look for that. And I'm very confused why that's not something that's taught on like fundamentals of energy healing 101. It was taught to me in an advanced trance mediumship program that I went to, and I realized how invaluable it was instantly, and I've just used it ever since. So that's one of those healing techniques that sort of baffles me, that it's not taught in kind of basic energy healing systems like Reiki, things like that. I've never really heard many teachers even really speak to that. There's sort of just this assumption that the crown chakra is always sort of there and in its prime, but it's actually one that gets damaged fairly easily. And if you think about it, it's because it's really bridging the gap between this higher sense of self, this kind of star cosmic quality to who you are, and the very physical version, earthly version of you. And so it really holds space for those 2 points to connect. So it has quite a bit of information that's flowing in and out of there. Now, even if you have some spirit guides or different spirit beings that you've crossed paths with, they always tend to cord into the back of the neck, but this of course affects the channeling aspect of your crown chakra as well. So you can find the ripple effect of that cord that's come in also in the crown. And so, just looking at more of a analytical perspective of how that can add up and create some discord or chaos, it's really that just because there's a tendency for, let's say, that connection from spirit guides to impact the throat chakra doesn't mean that it isn't also affecting the crown. Now, I'm not trying to say it's a bad thing, but just having stuff in your space that isn't you and not really giving it a lot of attention or disconnection can start to accumulate here in the crown chakra, which then causes that tilt to occur. So if we're looking for why would the tilt happen, it can happen in even just very conscious, intentional connections with guides, or for me, when I'm doing sessions with people and they want me to connect with a loved one that's crossed over, after I'm done with the session, I always have to really pull them out of my space and really look for where my crown, hula hoop is really hovering, and make sure it's right over the top of my head. And it's interesting because more often than not, I find that my own personal tendency is to sort of drop it back here. So I tend to have this sensation of having to sort of pick it up and bring it back over, and then it's like a direct alignment with my higher self. So just having that as something to generally look for when you're scanning your body or doing your daily healings, it's definitely not going to hurt. It's not something I visit every single day, but I'd say maybe once a week or so is kind of my tendency. And, if you're feeling like you're very foggy and you can't think clearly, or you're just feeling off, that would be a really great time to check in with that and just make sure, it's not tilted out over here. And again, like most things I teach, don't really sit with this whole need to understand or why it's happened. It kind of doesn't really matter. The point is just that you're fixing it and creating this alignment. And the more you do that, the less it actually shifts out of place anyways. So the more attention you kind of put on that space for a period of time, the more the body goes, oh, this is something that we want to work on. This is something we don't want to keep saying yes to, kind of losing the tilt. But it does happen, and it happens even in like a minor argument or something. Or if you get really upset or really emotional about something, it can cause a bit of a tilt as well. So sometimes it doesn't have to do with anybody outside of you, but it's more of just something you're processing or going through. So there's so many reasons why that's why I'm like, it doesn't really matter what the reason is. The point is just that you put your attention on this space and create a healing for your crown chakra. So before I go into like flossing the chakras, like we've talked about before, which is really just that fancy way of just moving energy back and forth like this. Before I do that in the crown center, I always want to look for that axis point first and then start to floss the chakras. It has a much more profound effect on the rest of the body. Things are put back into place. It's kind of like trying to build a muscle, but you need a chiropractic adjustment. It's kind of like making sure you're dealing with the sort of skeletal alignment before you start to develop those skills, those muscle strengths, right? So after I look for that tilt, I just immediately start by the pulsing, and even just like closing my eyes and imagining my hands doing this is just as effective. Occasionally I'll just do it with one hand if I am really not trying to exhaust my shoulders and the whole upper body thing, because this is kind of awkward, right? So don't feel like you have to do it that way. I think even just pulsing with one hand back and forth like this does tend to really create a change in the back as well. You might find a preference that really suits you. Maybe you like working from the back side and kind of pulsing this way. That's fine as well. But just having that intention and having this astral hand doing it for you is also perfect. So just pulsing energy, flushing it through there. And then what I really love to do after I'm done kind of flossing and doing some twists and pulling out some cords, things like that, I also really love to spin it. So this is the chakra where I really get fancy with the spinning. And I feel like the more you spin it, the more the rest of the body's chakras start to spin. So there's this really cool effect on the remainder of the body just from addressing this one chakra here. So, and we're going to talk about in a second how this really links to the grounding, how they're both totally interconnected here. So know that as you create a change in this crown chakra, you're really affecting your grounding as well. So I like to just take my hand, or my idea of a hand if I'm closing my eyes, and I just use my fingers and kind of like this is just what's natural for me. Find what works for you. I like 2 fingers. I don't know why, but I'll just do this kind of spinning thing. And so what I'm doing is just initiating some movement through that chakra, and I'm just speeding it up. And what's happening is things that were kind of lodged in that chakra will start to just go and explode out into the aura. And then it's like now you have a bigger awareness of what those things were, and you can sort of just send them to source, or you can file them away, or you can sort of bring them forward and look at them. So it starts to just take everything that's compacted here and spreads it out and brings it into a new perspective that's easier to decipher and have clarity or just release. And whatever is really just like debris and has nothing to do with any lesson or anything you really need to know, it's just going to release and go to source. So it's kind of like an automatic recycling kind of kicks in. And then there might be a few things that kind of float in because it needs some form of attention or something from you. So that's really just my quick nutshell version of how to work the energy of the crown chakra. Of course, you can also bring color in to heal that. So we're looking at the crown chakra being aligned with 2 different colors and figuring out which one you prefer, maybe a blend of both. But typically there's the choice of violet, so a nice purple color, or you've got white. So some people will tune into the crown chakra and really see this big giant white light. Other people will really start to get that visceral purple energy, and for me, I'm much more on the purple side. So as far as seeing energy, I see the purple very strongly. I do see white every now and then, but to me, in my library of defining things, have more often than not associated the white energy with a specific kind of angelic being. Now, it might be the person that you're working on or yourself, like a higher aspect coming into the body, but to me the white really represents something a bit more ethereal and less about this connection with your body that I believe the crown really has more access to. So again, there's no rules. Maybe you tune into your crown and you see a lot of white energy. That's totally fine. I'm just telling you from my perspective what I have experienced. Now, if I'm working with something like Reiki, which is where you're agreeing to work with a subset of beings that are from a very high vibrational place, they have good intentions, they're there to help assist you and create a change for someone, and you activate that change through a series of symbols and running the energy through your body as a channel and creating this universal energy flow. It's still part of a system. It's still not just source energy. It's coming through a type of filter that, from my perspective, is very valuable, but also not quite a direct alignment between you and source. There's a liaison. There's kind of a group, a collective that will show up to help you, and that's not a bad thing, but I just love to sort of bring that into perspective of how to differentiate between just working with universal source energy and working with something like Reiki. They are very different, and they both provide a lot of different types of healing, and people have different preferences, whether they want to work with one or both, or maybe a little one or the other, or a little bit of both, and it doesn't matter. It's all good. I'm just noticing that when people run a lot of Reiki energy, there's a lot more of the white frequency. So that's kind of interesting to me. But again, that validates what I said before, that it's really some sort of library acknowledgement in my body that there's a very spiritual being that's showing up, or maybe a collective to really help this healing. You know, sometimes when I'm working on someone and they're really working their like sacral center and their empowerment on maybe some kind of higher female vibrational healing going on, sometimes I'll be like, oh wow, there's like a Mary Magdalene energy coming in, and she tends to come in a white light, or maybe it feels just really angelic without any real definition of who it is, but you sort of trust that white light is really something that's there to serve you, and it's not there to take advantage of you or manipulate you in any way. So I hope that makes sense. But when you think about the colors and you're looking at ways to really heal the crown and heal the whole body, you can really bathe that either the violet purple color or the white light, and just allow that color to circulate here, and then slowly bring it into the center of your head, and just play with filling up your entire body with that energy all the way down to your toes. Now, the really cool thing about the crown chakra is that it governs the connection that you have to the earth. So even though it's very cosmic, there's a loop of energy from the crown chakra directly with the grounding cord. So because the changes that you make in your energy field have a lot to do with this like storage of information that goes in the chakras that are actually above the seventh chakra that we're talking about. There's more chakras, they keep going, and they're all very high vibrational, have to do with you as a soul, and are less about like this physical body. So those chakras really correspond with your grounding. Now, you can't really have a lot of change in those higher chakras without having a strong grounding foundation. So when I talk about the interconnectedness of the crown and the grounding, what I'm really looking to bring your attention to is the experience of having a disconnected grounding cord, and how does that affect your crown chakra, or vice versa. If your crown chakra is really kind of out and feeling like you're not really accessing it very well, are you able to ground your body? What does the grounding feel like? And just look for how the two are really interrelated, and there might be certain periods of time in your life where you're feeling really nervous or anxious, and it's hard to stay grounded, and it puts a lot of pressure on your crown chakra, almost like the body goes, okay, I'm grounded into the center of the earth, and then the moment I get triggered into this anxiety, shoop, I totally disconnect, and now I'm kind of floating. Well, when you get into that floating zone, the chakra that's really responsible for you being this kind of floaty version of you is your crown chakra. So it puts like pressure onto that energetic space and starts to create a bit of an imbalance. And over time, this can really cause havoc and create some physical sensations and symptoms going on in your head. So even though we talked about the sixth chakra really governing a lot of the face and the eyes and the brain, the crown chakra also sort of intersects with that same general area, but we've got the outer part of the brain being controlled with the sixth chakra, so the seventh chakra fills up the remainder of the brain. So not only does the crown chakra govern that aspect of the brain, but it also governs your central nervous system as a whole. So we talked about how anxiety and nervous system stuff can show up in these lower chakras, but the entirety of your central nervous system, and especially how the signals are stimulated from the brain center, that actually has a lot to do with what's going on in the crown chakra. So as you could imagine, having an imbalance in the crown chakra can manifest as having a central nervous system issue, as having a brain hemisphere issue. Things are not balanced. And also looking at, potential headaches, migraines, kind of pains and aches going on in the head area. For a lot of people, they find this area of sensitivity, and I'm no exception, although it seems to get triggered kind of sporadically in my life and not a constant. But it's this one spot, like right in the center of your head, on the top of your scalp. If you kind of use your finger to sort of walk into this center spot, you'll start to feel this kind of sensitive area. It's not like a super like, ooh, that really hurts. But you'll start to just kind of walk along this center line here of your head and just find that point. And you'll notice there's one little spot, and mine's right here. So it's kind of farther back. It's like right in here. And it starts to feel like, ooh, it almost has the sensation like you got hit there or something, like kind of bruised. And what that's telling you is you've got a lot of information in your crown chakra. And that's the point at which the crown chakra really hooks into the body. So if you're very, very sore there, it might just be a sign that your crown chakra really needs some healing and attention. And if you feel like it's like that all the time, then you might just have kind of a generalized overworked crown chakra, which a lot of sensitive people tend to have. We have these little, octopus arms out in the world from the crown trying to pick up information and know what's going to happen, and tend to be very like studious or analytical, love facts, they love researching, those sorts of things. Those can be some of the, archetypal symptoms that come with having a very active crown chakra. Now, this isn't a bad thing, but just the way it takes a toll on the physical body, it starts to give you a bit of an awareness that perhaps it's slightly out of balance if you're having any sort of physical pain. So, like I said, mine goes through sort of sporadic moments where, like, right now it doesn't hurt that bad, but there are definitely times where I am perhaps doing too much channeling or too much mediumship type energy, and I'm not balancing it very well, and that area feels like, almost like as soon as I touch it, I'm like, ah! Like it's a very sensitive spot. So just notice where you're at today or what's going on there, and when it crosses your mind, you know, maybe when you're shampooing your hair or something, just revisit that and notice if it kind of changes, or if it gets better or worse with days that you're having to really analytically think, or maybe the days you're really playing with your spirituality and going into intuitive development. Notice what it feels like then. So just start to notice at what point that sort of scalp area becomes kind of a trigger for you, and maybe it will start to educate you on, maybe you've got something going on energetically your body wants you to become aware of, and this is just a fun way to kind of show up halfway. So the crown chakra is very much where your like divinity connects to the body. So it's a gateway to your higher self. It's a gateway to source energy, and a vast world of wisdom. So this is multidimensional wisdom. This is the piece at which your body remembers where it came from, why you're here, what your purpose is, has a lot of information about who you've been in other lifetimes, and this tends to be more of the positive aspect of those lifetimes. So when you're reading the chakra itself, or reading the 7th layer in the astral body that is projected from the crown chakra, you know, remembering that it's actually the 7th layer out, so it's not super close and tight to your body. It's actually more on the outskirt of your aura, right? So this is where that information is stored. And what you might find is this series of acknowledgments of who you were in other lifetimes that was really rewarding. Like the lifetimes, the aspects where it was like really fun to be that version of you, something that really brought you joy, or you really, you know, were given a set of, you know, perhaps not so great circumstances and turned it into something really cool. And so it's something that, you know, maybe in a soul level, you could say that you're proud of it, and you want to remember it. You want to have that information there to remind you of what you're capable of and who you've been. So it's a power kind of dynamic versus the past life information that's like, oh, here's how you died in all these lifetimes, and here's all your slavery lifetimes. Like, it's not so much of the lower aspects. Maybe that's not true for you. Maybe when you tune in, you end up finding some lower aspects there. That's totally cool. I'm just giving you kind of a generalized invitation into what I've experienced in working with people. The type of information that tends to be in the crown is very exciting and fun for people to hear about. And when these past lives are really in service for you to know, it gives you like a stronger connection to faith and trust, and sort of like the surrender that's a higher aspect of surrender, like really knowing that you are protected and surrounded by spirit team that loves you, and you feel like you're meant to be here. It's a sense of connection. And so a lot of those past lives can be hovering in that area, so that way your body is constantly tapping into that and remembering, so that way if you come up into a current present time set of circumstances or an environment that doesn't feel so good, that you also have the frame of reference of something else that's an alternative to that, so you don't feel like you're stuck or abandoned or victimized or anything like that. So in my experience, the crown chakra holds a lot of really higher aspects that are quite lovely to look at. Of course, you can pick up something and then kind of zoom into that and see maybe some of the lower aspects of those same lifetimes, but generally the pieces you're going to see or feel into start with this like magnificent, like, wow, look at what you did, or look at who you were. And so it can be a really rewarding and fun thing to look at. Now, you know, just as an example, when I've done readings for teenagers that are graduating from high school, the high schools sometimes hire intuitive readers to come and do like tarot cards and create some kind of, you know, what they think is kind of just like a circus act for the kids, but it ends up being this like profound healing for them, right? Which I love on a second note. But the cool thing is that, you know, you only have 5 minutes to read these kids. And so I had to make a decision, you know, is it going to be more fun for their graduation party for me to be really tuning into their root chakra and looking at all the aspects of, kind of chaos and discordance, or can I read from their crown chakra and also sort of validate maybe some stuff that's going on that's not so enjoyable, but really spending 75% looking at this sort of magic of them being them. And it's such a rewarding experience. And in one-on-one sessions, because that you have a full hour, you tend to go through the whole spectrum of things. But if you only have a short period of time to read someone and you want it to be kind of light and fun, you definitely want to tune into the crown chakra. That is absolutely the space that you're going to find the most fun and exciting and passionate and joyful information in somebody's energy field. So I just thought I'd mention that, because I think sometimes it's lovely to have a full session with someone, but sometimes you don't have that option, or somebody only has a few minutes to sit with you and you want to leave them feeling really good. And it's very valuable information to do that. So I love inviting people to even just read crowns. Now, I want to get into crown matching. So when you are trying to read someone and having a connection with their energy field, there's a way to sort of just feel into it just by being present with them. But there's also a tool that I want to give you that's really easy for just connecting your crown to receive information from the other person's crown. Now, you can also do this with just reading yourself, just setting the same intention just to read you. So it works whether you're doing it just for you or for somebody else. But what you want to do is pick a color, and each color that you read from will affect the information. So when you look at, well, does it matter what color I read from? Yeah, but also use your intuition, use your gut feeling. If you feel like you really need to put pink in your crown and read from pink, then do it. But generally, you would look at through that purple energy that's already sort of occupying the crown, and you just go, okay, let me sort of splash this purple color here, which is funny because I've got all this purple on my plant lights. So just splash this purple color here, and then imagine that you're tossing that same purple energy into the person's crown that you're trying to read. So now you guys are matching on the same vibration, and it'll be easy for you to just perceive what's going on in that person's crown. So now when you're reading your own energy, you can do the same thing, and you can also pick a different color. Another color that's really good for reading and matching energy that way is a sky blue. It's like a very light color blue, and it can be really, really effective when it comes to bypassing some of the heaviness and the density of the emotions that kind of occupy the lower chakras. So because the blue really creates more of a purple indigo sort of vibe, it kind of pulls you into what we call a trance medium space, which is really just a fancy term for you channeling a higher aspect of you. And in order to allow that vibration to connect with the physical body, it can use color frequency to open that like a gateway. So again, play with different colors. When I went to one of the intuitive development schools, they were teaching that you would sort of read, we'd have people come in off the street, and they sign up for an hour session, and then 3 of us would read someone at a time. And so 3 readers to 1 person receiving, and one of the readers would just give a gauge on, okay, well, this person is running kind of a reddish color in their crown right now. And so instead of matching that exact red, we would go just a few notches higher, so like a slightly higher vibrational red than where they currently are. And that would allow us to match into their energy field. So that's another way to approach it. I don't really read that way anymore. Can't really tell you why, except for that it felt a bit off for me to keep reading that way after I went out on my own and left the school. It felt like I was getting almost like a suppressed version of the reading, probably because those colors really are associated with other chakra points and different layers in the aura. So I don't really want to read people from that space. I'd rather read them from the crown and be able to sort of look at all the other places, aspects of them from that perspective than looking through a lower perspective trying to like reach into the crown. So I'm not exactly in agreement with that method, but I just want to offer it to you because it was something that I was taught and did do for quite some time. So play with it. If you have the chance to read other people and you want to play around with how it all sort of translates in your body, these are things I would highly, highly recommend. Now, I want to talk about one more thing in relation to the crown painting. If you're really having a hard time connecting with someone, or it feels like you're trying to have communication and you just keep missing the mark and you're not really understanding each other or seeing eye to eye, you can have that intention to match crowns with somebody. So even if you go with like a gold color, which is another color that's great to read people from, if you go with gold, then let's say you're having an argument with like your partner or something and you're just really going at it and you can't really get on the same page, just imagine that you're matching their crown to that same gold color and really just sit with this gold here and just really tune into it after you sort of paint theirs, and just allow your bodies to kind of match on a vibration. And then oftentimes what happens is suddenly there's kind of a release and you're able to really come together and have some type of meeting or communication that's a bit more fluid. So that can be really helpful, even if somebody that you're just casually having a conversation with, or maybe it's like some form of administration when you're trying to get like something done and it feels like you're just not corresponding. You know, I use it in weird ways, even, you know, like at the grocery store, if I can't seem to get somebody fully present or something, it feels like they're making a lot of mistakes and maybe it's affecting me and what's going on, you know, they're bagging my groceries weird or something. Like, I'll just match crowns and just sort of ground them and kind of connect with their energy for a second, and then watch how, you know, suddenly they're like more like systematic and they feel present and they're there. And so it can be really helpful just to have that as a tool, to know that you're quite capable of bringing in different aspects, higher versions of people into their body. And they don't always have that conscious awareness of how to do that themselves. So through this sort of color bath, kind of painting the crown technique, it can be very effective for them to receive a healing and for you to get your need met and to feel more comfortable in your environment. So don't feel like you're invading someone's space by doing that. You're like offering them a healing. So it's a really beautiful way to kind of show up and interact with the world around you. I tend to do it so quickly without even really thinking. It's like whoever is showing up to have a conversation with me, I'll just match crowns as quick as I can before we get into the conversation. It's funny to watch them because they tend to kind of go like they get a release, you know. It just feels better. So play with it. See if it feels better for you. Another thing that's interesting about looking at the crown chakra is some of the aspects of an unbalanced chakra and kind of what to look for. So besides some of like the fogginess that we talked about earlier, and the headaches, you might also have experienced a type of like not being able to learn or absorb information correctly. There might be periods of time where it almost felt like you had some kind of learning disability, or just suddenly you're like, I'm so good at this, but for whatever reason I just like can't do it today. That might be a sign that something's going on in your crown, that you just need to circulate and move some energy and then come back to it. Another thing is looking at the energy of depression and how much depression energy can sort of float into the crown. And as you would imagine, having depression energy in there can really affect you on such a great level that you almost feel disconnected from source, disconnected from your own divinity. And now your body is running through a channel that's like squeezed and not really receiving. It's not in a receptive state. It's more in a defensive state and kind of dulled down. So if you look at vibration of energy like this, depressed vibration would be more like this. So there's just not a lot of energy to work with. So it could be hard to kind of sense that in somebody's energy field because it doesn't really have a strong charge, but you might sort of pick up on this sort of like a hole in their aura. Like when I'm looking in somebody's crown chakra and I pick up on depression, it almost feels like there's a draft. I hope that makes sense, but it's drafty. And so that, to me, over time, I've learned is a form of depression, almost like there's a gateway for them to sort of escape and sort of be elsewhere. They're not really super present in the body. Of course, that's problematic for many different reasons, but if you do know someone who is depressed or is experiencing depression or any type of like suicidal thoughts, things like that, really look for this energy in their crown chakra. You're also going to find it in their other chakras as well, but if you're able to really give it a healing from the crown chakra, it can really reset the rest of the body, and by the time you scan the rest of the body, it might be vastly different. So it's important to look there. This is also a place where other ancestors or different influential spirit beings can really cause havoc. And of course they can cause a lot of healing and beautiful things too, but we're looking at depression energy, and I'm just remembering right now that sometimes there's a connection to an ancestor that they're really struggling with, that perhaps had depression, or was that vibration that they were carrying is now translating in this person's body as depression. So I always look for, is this really their depression, or is this depression inherited from the genetic line? Is there other ancestors invested in this depression energy? It's just important to kind of pay attention to that and scan and at least look for it and ask the question. And sometimes it might just be that person's depression. But a lot of times I end up finding a multitude of answers. Like, yes, it's their depression, but there's also this secondary response, this genetic depression that runs through their dad's family line or whatever it may be. And so it's important to look for that in the crown, because usually they're corded in there if there is somebody invested in that. So you don't always want to just heal the depression energy. You want to look for some of the rooted issues, and part of the rooted issue is the fact that you've got an ancestor that's invested in this vibration being present in the body. So you really want to disconnect that. Now, why would an ancestor be invested in it? Because they don't want to heal it. So as soon as that person heals it, it offers the same healing to that ancestor, and the ancestor might be resisting that change, resisting that healing, which I know sounds bonkers, but it's more common than you think. So another thing to look for besides the depression, and oftentimes they kind of come back to back or parallel each other, is a type of anger. And this isn't just anger for the sake of being angry. This is a deep level of anger here in the crown that shows up that can really only be described as like an anger for the divine, like you're angry at source. And so there's a bitterness to it. It's very deep. It runs through the whole body. Even as I say that, like my body's just like, ugh, because it's so intense. When people are angry with source and angry with the divine energy, it's very aggressive, and it's scary because it feels almost like as they occupy that type of emotion here, it allows them to kind of vacate the vessel, and so then other things kind of come in and play around and express themselves through the body, and it can be really scary. If you know somebody that's going through that, it's terrifying because it feels like you've got, Jekyll and Hyde going on. It's just, you never know what you're going to get. And when I look for when that's happening and I look for why, it's like, oh, there's this anger for the divine. And then you look for the wound and the trauma associated with causing that anger. But sometimes people are just so uncomfortable or so unhappy with their life or choices that they've made, they want someone to blame, and they end up blaming divinity. They blame source. And it's a very fascinating thing to occur, but it's really, really common in people who just generally feel funky and unhappy. And for those of us who feel really sensitive, it can be exceptionally challenging to spend time with these people because it feels very abrasive in our body. And even when I find it in someone's space, I do the best I can to heal it and move it out, but it's definitely one of my biggest triggers. Like, it feels like I've tangoed a lot with people that have vacated the vessel, and there's multitudes of weird things coming through, and it's just not fun. It's kind of a darker aspect of giving your body up. Now, thankfully, we don't have a lot of that going on the planet anymore. There was periods of time where it was way more common. Now we have a bit more of this higher vibrational energy occupying the entire collective, so it's less likely that you're going to be channeling something really destructive, although it's still possible. Not super common. You're more likely to have different beings that just want to sort of have drama if that makes sense. Like they're more drama invested and pity and victimization and things like that rather than like true danger. So that's good, but it's still not enjoyable. So those are things to look for in a misaligned, out of balance, kind of blocked crown. Those are just some of the symptoms and things to kind of scan and look for. Now, when we've got a experience in your lifetime that may have been a trigger in feeling embarrassed or humiliated, that archetype shows up. So if you've experienced that to such a degree that you never really healed from it, that information tends to show up in the crown. So if somebody was like made fun of as a child, maybe it led them to really dealing with a lot of mixed energy. Maybe it made them sort of enter a type of holding on to energy, which might manifest as going into holding on to weight and maybe some form of obesity or diabetes or some kind of body malfunction thing going on. A lot of that can be traced back to humility. And so if we look at the humility energy, more often than not, you're going to find some pictures of the experience throughout the body, but the place that humility really sits is like up here in the crown, which is really interesting to think about because it's almost like humility hits such a deep chord within you that it disconnects you from trusting yourself, trusting source, trusting your higher wisdom. So just allowing yourself to really think about any time you were humiliated and how detrimental it was for you in that time period, and maybe just aspects of it that are still kind of showing up. That's definitely something that we will look for in the meditation portion of this, and just clearing out the humility, because there's certain aspects of being bullied or judged that show up throughout the body, but for some reason the humility aspect just really seems to come with a series of self-punishment, and it's very fascinating. You might have an impression on, if you're working on somebody else, that maybe there's a bit of a self-worth issue that you pick up on. You might not necessarily sense the strong humility, but you might be like, oh, this person's really working on their worthiness. Well, it might be worth just sort of asking their body, were you humiliated at some point? And like look for that. You might see it in their throat center because maybe they were embarrassed when they were speaking and they stumbled over their words, or they said the wrong thing, and maybe it was a big ordeal in their childhood or something. You're just going to notice different parts in the body that light up, but really look for where did that disconnect this person from their crown chakra. So there's also another aspect I want to talk about in the crown, which feels like a relatively new thing. I mean, in the grand scheme of lifetimes on Earth, it's definitely in the newer realm. But we're looking at a grouping of people in a collective that have been so immersed and so obsessed with spiritualism and all that comes with that, that sometimes, like everything in moderation, everything in balance, right? Sometimes it gets out of balance, and even though you have good intentions to be very spiritual and very honoring of your spirituality, sometimes there's too much attention on it. Sometimes it's too boxed in and limited, and you can't even see that that's what you're doing, but it becomes a bit more obsessive to where it's not really serving you anymore. And sometimes that expression goes into what I'd call spiritual bypassing, which is when you learn a bunch of concepts through spirituality, and then you start to apply them in ways that are a bit more manipulative and not how they were intended to be received, and so you use them as sort of escapes for getting out of having to do certain things, or having to tend to perhaps some more humbling human moments, and so there's definitely this aspect of spiritual bypassing that can show up in the crown chakra, and I'm noticing more and more and more of it as modern times have sort of given us this platform, especially through like social media, where people are so aware of spiritual concepts that they're sort of just tossing them around and not really understanding the real depth at which they're meant to be perceived and sort of sat with, and they're using them as almost like language tools to kind of deflect, accountability, or the need for having to overcome obstacles or show up to share space with people. It's kind of like, I'm trying to think of some examples because there's so many, but I think one that shows up a lot is a lot of the spiritual teachings about, if there's an energy vampire in your life, you really need to be careful of who you spend your time with. Well, if you really obsess over that and it gets too imbalanced, then you might find yourself not wanting to be around anyone, or maybe being so hyper aware of this energetic vampire thing that you accidentally become one. So there's so many different variables that you can find here in the crown that can be a bit discordant. Or maybe people just like to be sort of know-it-alls, and if somebody presents them with like, hey, you really hurt my feelings the other day when you said X, Y, and Z, and if you're somebody who's spiritually bypassing, you might not really listen or hear what that person is saying about you hurting them, and instead you might say, oh, well, I'm only responsible for myself. I'm not responsible for you, and, so really this is your problem. And so it can cause a bit of an issue with your true divine wisdom being sort of overridden with analytics and trying to like slap on different concepts and say, well, like, here's all the jargon, and you're not really like embodying it or learning and growing with it. You're just using it as ways to kind of manipulate your surroundings. So I don't think a lot of people are very aware that they're doing it. I don't think it's a conscious thing. I think there are some people that are, but generally people don't seem to be that aware of the fact that they're doing it. And so it's just something to kind of be aware of. If you get somebody who insists that their trauma has really served them and they're not even willing to look at some of the lower aspects of trauma, that's another way to look at that spiritual bypassing, because you should always be able to look at both. It doesn't mean you can't have your takeaway of positivity, but if you're trying to override your trauma with positivity, you're suppressing it. You're not really allowing it to express itself. So you get to have both. You get to say, yeah, this really sucked losing this person. This was probably one of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my life, and it tore me apart. And then you also get to say, but now that I've gone through all of this, I'm looking at the courage that I have and the bravery and the ability to overcome something that really felt like I had to define who I was again, and so you get to have both. But there's a group of people that won't acknowledge any of the trauma. They won't even admit that it was painful or that it hurt. They just won't admit that because they think that it has something to do with negating the positivity aspect, and they're trying to cling because they've got a concept in their mind that says you have to stay positive, and they don't even allow themselves to go into the reality of what it really felt like. They just immediately try to jump into, well, here's the positive overriding. So a lot of that kind of dynamic, and whether we do it to ourselves or not, we're totally guilty of that too sometimes. That can be sitting in your crown chakra. So those are just some of the themes that tend to come up here. You might also find a lot of spirit guides that are really trying to communicate through the crown chakra. But I would say that they feel a bit more like they're a bit more advanced. Gosh, I feel kind of weary of using that word, but it's like the closest word I can think of that matches the energy. But they're a bit more advanced if they're courting into your crown. If they're just somebody that's recently crossed over, not really likely to show up in your crown. They're probably going to show up in your throat. And again, one's not better than the other, but if you're trying to sort of differentiate in channeling and just kind of looking at how certain spirit beings communicate, if one's really coming through your crown, it means that you've got sort of an agreement for you to kind of channel the information. And at this stage of your learning, I would say trust that. You're always welcome to really perceive that with authenticity. Does this feel good? Does it make me feel good when I channel this? And if the answer is yes, then it's probably some soul family, another aspect of you. And so it's safe to do that. If it leaves you feeling really depleted and kind of off and not feeling generally good, then maybe reconsider that contract agreement with that collective or being, whatever it is. So I don't want to say that it's always safe, because I'm not a very definitive person as far as language goes, but generally I would trust it. I would say that it's probably there to serve you if it's showing up. There's not a lot of permission for lower aspect beings to really occupy the crown anymore, which is great. The only real gateway that they get to come in is if you're really vacating the body in some form of addiction or escapism or drug use or pretty severe depression. So those are the exceptions. But generally, you're going to find some really high aspect beings that want to communicate with you there, and it's super cool. It feels like we're really in a series of openings, gateway openings right now for our throat chakra to heal and the crown chakra to heal, which is funny because, you know, corona, in the coronavirus thing, actually, corona means crown, right? So really, ultimately, we're headed to a crown healing, but we're starting with some of the lower chakras first and working our way up to the crown chakra. So we're not even quite fully immersed into the downloads and activations that are coming through the crown chakra, because we're busy really clearing out space in our throat chakra as a collective, at least as it goes right now. So I hope that gives you some more present time reference to kind of look for. Another thing that you can find in the crown chakra that's really fun to read is, so we looked at the sixth chakra, and it's how you see the world. It's like through that chakra, it's how you see things. Well, if you zoom out of the sixth chakra and come into the seventh, that perspective shifts into how others see you. So you really get this big, expansive perspective of how every being and how the world and the universe and the cosmos see you. And it can be a really fun energy to tap into, because this is the space where it gives you goosebumps, it makes you feel really emotional and really connected to everything around you. You see how important you are and needed and unique and beautiful, and there's just like no denial of that. It's just so true, and you can feel it and sense it and know it. That it's a really fun thing to look at. So I would definitely spend some time in, you know, how does the world see you? And we'll definitely get into that in the meditation, because it's a really powerful way to bring yourself back into alignment of how magnificent you really are and how important of a role you're really playing just by you being you. So this is a really fun one to read, and this is one of my favorite things to read in people's spaces. Now, the crown chakra governs your knowingness, which means when you look at your different sensory abilities, and we know the sixth chakra is clairvoyance, where you see from. You've got your clairaudience in your ears, you hear things. You've got clairsentience, which is in your second chakra. It's how you feel. You can feel and read information. The crown chakra is the all-knowing, so claircognizance. This is where you just know. And rather than claircognizance, I like to say it's your knowingness, because it's like you just know, and you don't know how you know, but you suddenly just know. So when you ask a question and you sit with it and you wait and you just get this sort of download of like, here's all the information. That's your crown chakra giving you the information through your sensory abilities, through your intuitive channels. And so it's very natural. All of us do this all the time. And the healthier your crown chakra is, the more this will just become second nature for you, and you'll just be doing it all the time. Sometimes there's a lot of information kind of jammed in there, and it can kind of cloud that sense of clarity. But generally, for those of us who are seeking to develop your intuitive awareness, you're going to find that your claircognizance, that knowingness, just starts to happen for you, and it becomes very effortless. And some other things that can really affect your knowingness is whether you feel like you're worthy of that or not. So sometimes like the whole worthiness piece comes up here. It's not so much of your willpower as it is, do you feel like you deserve to be in that state of power? Sometimes there's an imbalance where the body starts to feel like it's tapped into like feeling insignificant. or not of value, and that's really just something in the crown chakra that's like totally off and not fully aligned. It can kind of trick the body into believing that, or just sensing it and feeling it. You might even feel it and be like, I know this isn't me, like that is so not how I normally feel. But you might tap into those vibrations of being insignificant or not belonging, and really looking for that energy in the crown chakra, because that's generally where you're going to find some of that information and how it's sort of disconnected you from your knowingness and from having that higher self divine wisdom connected. Another thing is, asking yourself, does my path feel fulfilling? And do I really feel like I'm aligned on my path? Because that information is really stored in the crown. This 7th layer in your aura has a lot to do with all those pictures and information, the data related to your path, related to your purpose, things that you want to learn in this lifetime. All that information is really sitting there in your 7th layer. And it's funny because just looking at some of the symbology and teachings around the number 7 being such a divine number, it's kind of a sacred number that has been associated in history as a nod to some Christ consciousness, which is really just another name, another interpretation of source energy. So I think it's kind of funny that this information is stored in the 7th layer, which is essentially your 7th body and your 7th chakra. It's all like 777. So it's just fun to kind of play with the number aspects of these things as well. So yeah, does your path feel fulfilling? Do you feel like you're on your path? If you don't, that's okay. It just means that you've got some crown healing to do. It just means you've got some things in there that want some attention and maybe some release there, so you can really invite more aspects of who you are back into your crown and allow your body to find what is true for you, what is fulfilling, what do you need to seek in order to have that. Is there something missing in your life? Like, these are the places to really sit with those questions and put your attention on your crown chakra and allow that to really funnel into the rest of your body. So oftentimes when people think about the crown chakra, they think about it being something that is constantly perceiving. Like, they're just constantly thinking about it being almost like an intake center. And it's not that that's wrong, because you are constantly perceiving from there. But there's so much release that can happen from the crown chakra. Now, what I mean by that is when you are moving something out of somebody's body in another area, like let's say they have a pain in their hand, and you're moving and you're flossing the chakras in the hand and you're trying to help them release the pain, and you're moving energy and you're just starting to create this intention with your attention to heal their hand or your hand. What you might find is that you start to see energy start to move out of the hand, but it might also come out of the top of their crown. Because really the entire body can release from the downward angle out the root, go down into the ground, but it also sometimes erupts out the top like a volcano and just really splices out through the crown chakra. So I feel like there's not a lot of teachings or acknowledgement of how much releasing actually happens through the crown chakra. And when I look at why do things release there? Well, it's because there's less resistance there. There's more of a higher aspect of you allowing that release to occur through the crown chakra. There's also way more energy in your crown chakra than any of the others that we talked about below. And so the vibration, the capacity for vibrational healing is much higher in the crown chakra than any of the others. And this is me not acknowledging or speaking to the chakras that exist above the 7th chakra, because those are also very powerful centers. But just generally, as we get from the tier from bottom to top, the expansiveness and the amount of information gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and the higher vibrations as you move up the body. So, I don't want to say it's more capable, but that's the closest language I can think of trying to articulate why the crown chakra would release so much. So it's simultaneously taking in data, absorbing information, putting its little tendons out into the world and picking up information and bringing it back here. And it's also releasing and dumping out. So it's a very active center. And that's why it can get out of balance and be sort of this overused, or a place that other people can sort of court in and try to figure out your divinity, figure out your wisdom, try to have clarity for their self through your crown chakra. So it's fun to really look at how much your body is really designed to make release and reset as effortless as possible. And this design of the way energy loops and funnels itself really provides kind of a high sensation when you look at that through the crown chakra and how it feels through the crown chakra. So you might sort of have this floaty, kind of weird, heady experience when you do generate a lot of stimulation there that your body perhaps is not used to, and that's a very temporary energy just to get your body reset to that. So don't be afraid if you feel a little lack of grounding. When you do a crown healing, you might start to be like, wow, I feel kind of floaty and kind of weird, but I also feel like I got a healing and maybe I'm integrating, because that's really what that feels like. So don't be afraid of that sensation as long as it's temporary. If you wake up and you're having that for multiple days in a row, where you're really not able to ground, then there's probably something else going on, and you need to really tune the whole chakra system and not just, wait for it to sort of sort itself. But generally, if you're creating a change, showing up to a meditation and having an intention to really open your crown chakra and really give it a nice healing, there will be some side effects of that change, which is really a positive thing, but it can have a bit of a funny sensation in the body where you either feel like really high and you're kind of like wee, kind of buzzy, or it can feel sort of like spacey, like you can't even really form words and you're kind of out of it. So that's just part of the integration, and it's unique to you, and everybody's different. But those are just some of the symptoms that I've personally experienced and witnessed with other people. So when it comes to sound healing, the crown heals with the B note. So anything that aligns with the B note will stimulate the crown chakra. And as far as toning with your voice and your vocal cords, the Tibetan kind of monk association of toning to open the crown chakra is E. So it's like if you were to say the word like glee, it's 2 E's. So glee, E, and it really goes. So we learned Om and E. So if you want to open these two centers, you can rotate between the Om, E, Om, E, and just really feel into that. So that can be a really powerful tool. And as far as crystals go, you have a lot of options. So you could play off of the purple concept, look at purple stones like amethyst. You can also play off of like clear quartz or clear stones. Even black stones can be really great for the crown chakra. And then of course there's like golden colors that are really crown activating. So there's a lot of different stones that resonate with the crown center. And I really encourage you to find one that feels right for you. And I think as far as some of the fun cosmic ways to connect, I would say that even the Moldavite stone, which is the one I wear all the time, which is this kind of green stone, it's not really a color that you'd associate with the crown, but it has this really cosmic aspect that creates this crown opening. So just because something is not the color that you would associate with that crown doesn't mean it's not appropriate for opening that energy. Plus the Moldavite is the one that comes from a meteorite that hit Earth and then became a very coveted stone because it has so many different properties and minerals that it's very extraterrestrial. So it has this very cosmic effect on our aura. So really find one and feel into it and really engage with it and just notice where it feels like it's stimulating you and trust that. I know a lot of friends that resonate with Moonstone. Moonstone is a great crown chakra activator. There's also, like, I use this one a lot. I'm just thinking about some of the stones that I have sitting right here, because you know me, I'm always playing with different ones. But there's apophyllite, which is a really lovely kind of white, clear, I mean, it's not really clear, it's more on the white side, but it also comes clear. This is a giant piece of apophyllite. Super crown activating. Like, me just holding it in my hand right now, my crown's like bzzz. So this is really great to use if you want to just channel or have information kind of just effortlessly activate there. You can also use, you know, a stone that's got kind of grays and browns and clear, like a nice little smoky quartz. That could be really great for the crown as well. So I hope that's helpful. One other thing to play with is smells and how smells can really activate your crown. Now, you might have a very particular smell that resonates with you. I really like the smell of roses. I feel like that really just blasts my crown open. Sometimes I notice the same effect with mint varieties, so like peppermint or spearmint, and occasionally a certain citrus might resonate with me, like bergamot. That kind of citrusy grapefruit type of smell can sometimes activate the crown chakra as well, so you can really play with that and find what feels good to you or feels like it resonates. There's a lot of different smell associations that are, you know, sort of taught to me that didn't really resonate with my crown so much, so that's why I'm like, I don't want to give you like a solid, like, these are the essential oils that work really well. But, you know, the frankincense also opens up the crown just as much as it opens the sixth chakra because of the brain hemisphere healing. So that's another really great one to work with. And frankincense plays really well with like myrrh, and those two are usually blended together, and they're talked about even in the Bible and like archaic times of people using it to really fetch cosmic information, divine wisdom. So it's always been associated with that. I also really like white sage. So I burn white sage to open my crown chakra almost every single day. So that is absolutely my favorite. I hope you guys learned a lot today, and I hope this resonates with you. I'm looking forward to the meditation portion. See you there.